In this video, we're going to take a look at Atramentis Artist Violet. Let's jump straight to the end with my opinion. On more absorbent paper, this just might be able to pass as a bluish, maybe, kind of tone. And that's because when the paper is not made as well, it sometimes does affect its color in what's going on. However, there's a chance that this could pass. Now, on better quality paper or very white paper, it is without a doubt purple. There's no passing, and it is a very nice looking purple at that. It does give some tone variation depending on the pen you put it into, and it can give some shading. Now, while it does shade fairly nice when it does that, that's not the reason that this ink is what you would tend to go to. You get this because you're after its permanence, its resistance to what's going on, and it does that extremely well. And Atramentis, when it comes to their permanent inks, tends to do very well. So with that, it would really be a matter of if you would prefer their document purple or their artist purple. Slightest differences, but I think either would be a good choice. I like to change things up by using a different pen each day. Today that pen is a Pelikan M120 Idyllic Blue with a fine nib. It's inked up, used for a day, and used to take the notes for this video. To see how I arrived at that opinion, let's take a look at the first writing sample done on Clairfontaine. Looking at the fine nib, it gives a nice tone of purple here. I'm really enjoying the way that this looks. Very nice. I don't, almost at a loss. There's no feather, there's no spread, there's spots of shading that really do show up. You notice it how day goes from a mid-tone down to a lighter tone, while is very dark. Lying goes from mid to darker and then lighter again. Very nice in how it looks. Really appreciate it. The zoom nib is tons darker than the fine was. There's no feather, there's no spread. There actually is a few moments of shading. Like if you see in that, you see some very dark spots. Same with the and toothache. So there's definitely some very, very dark purple tones that can come through here. Now, the zoom nib is something that I struggle with, so any ugliness here is really about my penmanship and not the ink. Looking at the music nib, it is lighter than the zoom, still quite a bit darker than the fine. There's no feathering, no spread. There's very little shading. I mean, I can say no shading, but there are one or two spots that show some of the shading coming through. I just don't think it's worth really pointing out, but that pen does tend to be a bit drier than the zoom. Looking at the back of the page, we see quite a bit of ghosting. This was aggressive into the paper. Now, you could use the back of the page, and it did not bleed through and touch the page underneath. To have a range of experience with this ink, all of the writing samples are done a Sailor Pro Gear Slim Mini with a fine nib. A Sailor 1911 Large with a zoom nib. A Sailor 1911 Standard with a music nib. The next writing sample is done on a WritePad's reporter pad. Looking at the fine nib, because of the whiteness of this paper, it's still really holding on to that purple. The fine has no feather, no spread. There is a couple of moments that happen, really barely worth mentioning, but they do happen where it gets a little bit darker, like the E in the, because my letter's all scrunched down. I think it works really well here. I just don't think the color's shown off especially well. Looking at the zoom nib, it is a whole lot darker than the fine was. There's no feather, there's no spread, there is some spots of shading. You definitely see where the ink was heavier on there, and it makes very dark, almost to the point of black, which I do think kind of looks nice. I think this looks good here. I just wish I was better with a zoom nib. Looking at the music nib, we see that it is, in general, about the same tone that we had with the zoom, which is quite a bit darker than we had with the fine. We get no feather, we get no spread, we get one or two moments that are going to occur that have some shading in it, but really only a couple of moments. Nothing stand out, but I don't see shading being what somebody goes after on this paper. Looking at the back of the page, we see that we got no ghosting and no bleed through. I agree with Vita. There's a lot to learn by doing multiple chromatographies. The next writing sample is done in a FieldNotes reporter's notebook. Looking at the fine nib, we have a nice, gentle purple tone here. We have no feather, no spread, no shading whatsoever. The absorbency of this paper has really eaten it up. However, I think what we're seeing on the paper is very nice to look at. Looking at the zoom nib, it is quite a bit darker than we had with the fine. We get no feather, we get no spread. We technically get a couple of spots that are darker, like the bottom of the Y in day, because it crosses the L of Pascal. It just means that it can happen, though I wouldn't really plan on it with this ink. Looking at the music nib, it is just a tad bit lighter than the zoom. There's no feather, no spread, no shading at all. There's nothing coming through with any kind of anything additional. I think the color looks very nice here. I just don't know about this ink on this paper for me. I just feel like, other than the fact that it's very permanent and a reporter pad, that's what would make them go well together. Looking at the back of the page, we do get quite a bit of ghosting, especially on the zoom and the music, not so much on the fine. We got no bleeding that came through, nothing touched the page underneath. Resistance tests are done to see how this ink can be expected to perform on the page, and more importantly, how hard it may be to clean from your pen. This smear is allowed to dry for 3 days before testing it. And here we see the results of the resistance test. The next writing sample is done in a Portage reporter's notebook. Looking at the fine nib, it's a cheaper paper, and while it still kind of looks purple, it kind of looks a little bluish. I could see it being almost confused as a blue here. Now we get no feather, no spread, 1 or 2 darker spots, not really shading. In the next to challenge, you see that the H and the E are a little bit darker. The word challenge has a couple of darker spots in it, but not really a whole lot for it. Looking at the zoom nib, it is a whole lot darker than the fine was, which, again, we should really expect. We're not getting any kind of feathering. We're not getting any spread. We do get a couple of dark spots. I wouldn't really call it shading, but technically you can get some of that there. I think this is doing very well, but I like this paper, so I'm becoming very biased towards it. Looking at the music nib, it is a little bit lighter than the zoom. There's no feather, no spread, no shading, just a very consistent purple, not being a confusing tone at all. Looking at the back of the page, to be clear, the music nib did create a spot that touched the page underneath. It would not stop me from using that page, but it did come quite a bit through. You see that there's a lot of ghosting. I don't know that you could use the back of the page and still have useful information. With over 1,000 inks reviewed, let's take a look at some color comparables. Here is KWZ Iron Gall Violet number 2. Here is Noodler's Purple Dream. Here is Pilot Crimson Glory Vine. Here is Private Reserve Ebony Purple. The next writing sample is done in an Office Depot reporter's notebook. Looking at the fine nib, it's quite a bit darker than we got on any of the other papers, and that's the first thing that really stands out here. We do get a tiny bit of feathering, but it is so under control, barely worth mentioning. It's only in a couple spots, but you'll see it on the word answers or the words were. There is a little bit of spread, not all the way up to a medium, not by far, just a little bit more than a fine, and there's no shading at all. Looking at the zoom nib, we're getting a little more feather than we got on the fine, and this is a wetter pen. We are experiencing some spread. I was trying to get this to write as narrow as possible, but it was fighting me all the way. We're not getting any kind of shading. This is paper, though, that is manufactured in a cheap way. Looking at the music nib, it is the same tone as the zoom. It does feather, it does spread, it does not shade, It is a dark purple the entire way through, so with that it's looking very nice. Looking at the back of the page, there is a tremendous amount of ghosting. A lot bled through and touched the page underneath, and I did a lot of circling for that. So it does corrupt that. Now, you can't use the back of the page. This is just not that great a paper. While it's nice to find other inks in the same color family, I'd prefer to find an ink that complements its color on the page. Here is KWZ Gray Luxe. Here is Levenger Gemstone Green. Here is Noodler's Borealis Black. Here is tag Kayo no Oto Yamabuki Iro. The last writing sample is done on 20-pound copy paper. Looking at the fine nib, this is where I say that cheaper paper sometimes, because it's purple, but it has a little bit of a maybe blue. It's a blue leaning purple at this point. The fine has feathering, has spread. Both are acceptable. The spread is very minor. The feathering is very minor. The point when you see Wallace where what looks like two giant feathers, that was me. That was not the ink doing that on the paper. There's no shading whatsoever. We don't expect it with this paper. Looking at the zoom nib, it is a whole lot darker than the fine. There's feathering there, which is tiny. Really, for this paper and for how wet that pen is, the feathering is very manageable. But it looks like I'm writing with a marker. There is spread, significant spread. There's no shading whatsoever. If it was a purple marker, I would be good. Looking at the music nib, it is a little bit lighter than the zoom. There's no feather. Surprisingly, I think it's the sort of squeegee-ish action. I'm not seeing feathering here. I see a little bit of spread, but considering how wide that nib is, I consider this to be very good. I think this is some of the better performance on this paper with these nibs. Now, we get no shading, but we don't expect it. Looking at the back of the page, we only had one spot where the music nib came through and touched the page on the other side. There's a lot of ghosting, which we really do expect. We expect bleeding, and that didn't happen, so good news. So what nib and pen do I think is going to give the best writing experience with this ink? This really does perform very well in just about any pen. However, for me, I like the tone better when it was lighter with the tiny little bits of shading that I was getting from a drier fine, or perhaps using a dry medium. Now, if you really want a very dark purple, then obviously a wet medium is going to give that to you. Keep in mind that this is a permanent ink, and with permanent inks, sometimes they're a little more aggressive getting into paper. So you might want to test that. Think back about how that went on the back of the Clairfontaine. It has the ability to be aggressive. It's just not doing that yet. I hope you got something out of this video, and if you want to be able to follow me over on Instagram, I'm there as an ink guy. Thanks for watching.